A major vote is taking place in Israel that could remake the country's justice system. The legislation calls for sweeping changes aimed at curbing the power of the Supreme Court.
אם כן, להלן תוצאות ההצבעה. חברי הכנסת, 64 בעד, אין מתנגדים, אין נמנעים. אני קובע כי הצעת חוק יסוד השפיטה תיקון מספר 4 עברה בקריאה השלישית ונכנסה לספר החוקים. ישיבה זו נעולה. הישיבה תחודש בשעה 4.
We're joined now by Reggie Cecchini in Washington. All right, so Reggie, this judicial overhaul is being driven by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right allies. What is the vote about, and how could it affect Israelis?
So, look, at the end of the day here, this vote is on judicial reform. And what we have here is a coalition-led government that leans heavily to the right, led in part by Benjamin Netanyahu, the kind of most conservative government in Israel's history here, ultimately trying to weaken the judiciary by saying that the Supreme Court can't step in and overturn or revise or stand in the way of laws that are being passed by the government. And they ultimately point to the fact that these judges are not elected people, and therefore they shouldn't have the ability to overturn laws that are enacted by people who were elected. Benjamin Netanyahu, in point, actually pointing to the United States system, where many of the judges here are elected, but that the Supreme Court is put in place kind of by a position of non-election, just on advice and consent. And there is general concern here that as this kind of first part of this judicial reform ultimately starts to unravel, that it could lead to a weakened judiciary and kind of get rid of that check and balance that is often in place to deal with what is coming out of the government. And for a country here that does not have a constitution, it simply just has a kind of simple set of basic laws to govern the country, there's a real concern here that a constitutional crisis could now be set up with activists and watchdog groups, including opposition lawmakers, ultimately going to the Supreme Court now to see whether or not this judicial overhaul bill that's being passed here is considered constitutional, of essentially pitting the Supreme Court against the government that is trying to go after the Supreme Court. That is why we have seen so many people taking to the streets for the last several months.
We're here to protect our democracy. We were left with no choice but to go to disobedience, nonviolent disobedience. We're here to protect our democracy with our bodies.
We came to protest against the changing of the administration in Israel. We fear we've gone down to a dictatorship. And we want to show in a way of performance how it would look. That's why we put ourselves judges' costumes, and we cuffed ourselves. And we also went with a robe around us that was led by Bibi. And that means to say that Bibi wants to take all the judges under his authority to get free of charge.
What are we hearing from global allies? How are they responding?
Well, look, most global leaders have been echoing some kind of frustration here over the last several months. Earlier in the year, it was the French president who had made comments, on a phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu. We then heard criticism from Germany's foreign minister. But even within the last week and the last few hours, more criticism has been directed at the Israeli government. Just last week in Kingston, the prime minister had said that while Israel is an ally, that consensus between the political parties needs to be found in order to prevent any kind of governmental crisis that could have an impact on the people. And over the last several days, we've heard not only from the U.S. State Department, from several members within Congress, but from the president himself, Joe Biden, who is a strong ally of both Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel, saying that this is a divisive bit of overhaul or judicial reform that is going through. And the sitting president, just in the last few hours on Monday morning, called this an unfortunate situation and is urging the government in Israel to move towards consensus. So here now you have some of the biggest backers of Israel standing in the way, getting involved in kind of international politics or domestic politics from another country that oftentimes they would steer clear from, solely because they have a general fear here that this could have a destabilizing effort inside Israel, which could ultimately lead to a bit of destabilization throughout the regional area as well.
All right, a story we'll be following very closely. Reggie, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks. That is our Reggie Cecchini reporting from Washington.